And we should be live now with a slight delay. So for the folks out there, welcome, welcome. We'll get started shortly.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our Preserve South Cobb Town Hall agenda and info session. Really glad that you can come. So we want to make sure that we have this time is valuable for you. We're going to have introductions. We're going to go over the key issues and claims by the proponents of this bill, and then we're going to also be expressing the concerns and the reasons why you should vote no. We'll talk about their claims, many of the concerns that have been communicated throughout the community and also through us as a Preserve South Cobb. And we're going to be telling you how you can participate, as well as we'll be taking your questions throughout. There'll be some breaks throughout the presentation, as well as at the end. So please put any questions you have in the chat so we can answer them throughout the presentation. Next slide. We're going to introduce ourselves. My name is Deirdre White, and we are members of Preserve South Cobb. We're a nonpartisan, non-ballot committee. We were formed in the spring of 2022, and we're just concerned about concerned citizens that are concerned about this cityhood initiative. We're not politicians, we're just volunteers that have come together and are giving of our time and our skill to make sure that we get out the vote and also make the community aware of what's going on. We want to remain as an unincorporated South Cobb County and work with the existing government and organizations to make the community better, versus creating an additional layer of government that's going to raise taxes and really have a lot of unknowns that we want to just really try to understand. But we really, the initiative is that we want to preserve South Cobb as an unincorporated part of Cobb County. As I said, I'm Deirdre White, and Tanya Leek is joining us, and you'll be hearing from her as well. Next slide. So we're going to be good.
Oh, sorry, I think I was on mute. Thanks, Deirdre. I know you got my back. Hi, everybody. Just to give a little bit of history, what you're going to be voting on either here now during early voting or on November 8th will be Georgia House Bill 839. Act number 837, and it would establish Mableton as an incorporated city light. And I want to be very clear, and Deirdre will talk about this shortly, is that it is not what we know today as historic Mableton and the town of Mableton. So we'll talk a little bit about the map and the boundaries, but keep in mind that it is going to be a city that is light, and meaning the services are not a full set of city services, and it would be called Mableton. But what it includes is really, really important for you to understand. From a historic perspective, just so you know, the Mableton Historic District, as we know it now, was incorporated in 1912 and disincorporated in 1916. And the reason I mention that is the reason it was disincorporated is actually important for you to know in terms of voting no, is that we suffered a heavy flood. And so there was an unexpected tax burden placed upon the residents because the city was responsible for those repairs. So again, they disincorporated in 1916 as a result. So HB 839 was originally filed in 2019, moved slowly through the legislature, and recently in spring 2022 passed through the Georgia legislative session and was signed by Governor Kemp. So it is now on us to have the final vote. So just to show you what it looks like on your ballot, or will look like on your ballot, it is the cityhood question, Mableton, determine whether to incorporate as the city of Mableton. So for those of you in other areas, which again we'll cover shortly, this will not be, it will become the city of Mableton, which will be the name, but it will incorporate a lot more than what is currently, what you know currently is Mableton. One thing to keep in mind is that, and it's really important again, when you say saying no keeps us in a place where we're much more flexible. Reversal of cityhood in the state of Georgia, so unincorporation, disincorporation, must be done through the legislature. So we would again have to go through, so just like 2019, this process started and it's now 2022, there would be a long lag time between us incorporating, and then if it didn't work out, due to no plans and lots of unknowns that come to fruition, it would be difficult for us to get out of the incorporation.
So as Tanya mentioned, the proposal for the cityhood is really including much more than Mapleton proper. And that is one of the unknowns and one of the misinformation that I'm sure many of you may have just found out, that you're actually included in this proposed city. And it was very deceptive. And Mapleton itself has 40,000 residents. And for some reason, the proponents would not explain, or they've given 3 different answers on how they decided to include unincorporated parts of Austell, Marietta, Smyrna, and Powder Springs. And up until just last month, they consistently, even on their website, only list 2 zip codes. And we know, and you may know, that you've included as well. So the unknown of, not knowing until the last minute is a problem. And this new proposed city will go from 40,000 residents to actually 78,000. And what that will do, it will make it the largest city in Cobb County. And it's unsustainable based on what we uncovered, and we're going to be sharing that with you. But just so you know that the city of Mapleton will be including many other communities like yours: Smyrna, Austell, Marietta, and Powder Springs. Next slide.
So the city feasibility study, there's been a lot of talk about this, and it is required by the state of Georgia as a condition of proposing and initiating the process for cityhood. So one of the advocacy organizations, the South Cobb Alliance, commissioned the study, and it was done by the University of Georgia, which is one of a few organizations that is authorized to do these types of studies. And that was done in 2020, early 2020. And that is relevant to, again, your decision. That was at least 2 years ago, and kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. So the proposal, for your information, is for what you'll hear referred to as a city light. And what does that mean? That means that it has a limited set of services that are basically under the auspices of the city. That for our purposes and from the study, and what the study was based on, was only the following. And this is, we're going to reiterate this: planning and zoning, code enforcement, parks and recreation, and sanitation, solid waste. So it is important to note that even within the study, the first box that you see there is actually directly from the study, that there are limitations to these studies. They obviously can't predict what's going to happen. Take, for example, early Mableton Incorporated in early the 20th century. They could not predict that a flood would happen, and the cost of government ballooned to the extent that they wanted help from the county. Additionally, the study is not a budget. So a budget has to be created. And within that budget, whoever is in the city council and whatever those folks determine is what the priorities are, that will determine what's going to happen as far as taxes and as far as what the money is going to be spent on. We have not seen anything that gives us any sense of what that might look like. Right? We have the feasibility study, but again, the feasibility study is not what a budget would look like from a city council and a set of priorities that would actually determine what taxes needed to be imposed. So a couple other things I mentioned based on pre-pandemic data, fiscal year 2017 and 2018 financial data, and 2010 census data. So not the latest 2020, for obvious reasons. It was done in 2020. It was based on a mixed bag of comparison cities: Marietta, Smyrna, Peachtree Corners, Brookhaven, and Dunwoody. Why? Because there's nothing comparable in Cobb County. There is no city light that exists in Cobb County, hence Peachtree Corners, which is a city light, and there have been some challenges there, is in Gwinnett County. So they pulled them in. Then it was talking about capital costs. So if you look at it, they brought in whatever city they could find. So that to me introduces some doubt in terms of, they're authorized to do this, but it does introduce some doubt in terms of whether or not we really have an understanding of what this would look like. And then lastly, and potentially most importantly, it does not include what is the impact to the county. And as a result, what taxes might look like at the county level and how they might change, and any additional changes that might occur as a result of kind of this city light hybrid model where we're getting some of our services from the county and some from the city. The Cobb County manager was quoted at a town hall in early this year that the study went through the legislation so fast, the feasibility study on Mableton Cityhood, that there was not enough time to really review the data. And at this point, we're going to break to see if there are any questions. So please let us know. You can ask in the chat. We really want to hear from you and hear what you're interested in. We did do an informal poll in the Facebook group, and what it seems that folks are most interested in from the Facebook group are taxes, which we'll be talking about shortly, and then city versus county services, which we'll also talk about. And then after that, sort of zoning, code enforcement, and economic development. So we hope to hit all of those points in the next 20 minutes. Any questions, moderator?
And continue on. We don't have any questions right now.
Super. Deirdre?
Okay, well, we're going to go on to the one of the main issues that everyone seems to be concerned about, and they should be, because it is one of the claims, but it speaks to that they're going to be providing better services, but the same taxes or taxes will not go up. You're not going to have an increase in your taxes. And this is a, next slide. So that claim of same taxes is really not realistic. And the proponents of this study, and it's stating in the feasibility study, is that they will be able to significantly improve the quality of life without raising taxes. And from what we understand and from what we are researching, what we see is that the reality is that cityhood will be costly. It will be costly, and there will be taxes. Not only will there be taxes that the county will be imposing, but at the same time, There'll also be county a millage rate increase. So with that, with any city that's come about, there's always a millage rate. And the city alone can actually set that municipal millage rate. And with that tends to be an unknown because of the rates that they can actually set. And being one of, if they, if this is to pass, being the largest city in the county with 78,000 residents, most likely there will be an increase. And not only will there be increases in taxes, there'll also be additional franchise fees and other fees that this new city proponents will be able to place on the residents. These are unknowns that once they're put in place, we cannot go back. Next slide. And not only, and as we mentioned, not only is it proven that taxes typically do go up, particularly if there's a city, but our own chairwoman, Lisa Cupid, said in June, now that people want to create cities, which it's gonna, how is it gonna be funded? And she herself says the taxes will be increased. So the claim that taxes will not is unfounded. And most recently at the town hall on August 17th, the county finance director didn't say yes, he didn't say no. He just said that the county reviews it every year and makes a decision to increase or not. And based on this statement from the chairwoman, the obvious answer is that most likely taxes will go up. Next slide. As I mentioned with that millage rate, this millage rate is, this section right here is actually from the feasibility study. And it really states that the city proponents have the authority to amend that charter. And they can do this within 2 years of the transition of when, after, if this is passed, when they decide to, have elections and have leadership in place, they have the ability within that gap period to actually set a millage rate and increase it in the community. So right away, this is something that we would be voting and allowing them to do. So it's just another uninformed information that is not stated in the ballot, and it's not actually been explained by the proponents because it's something they don't want you to know. And that's where we speak to that blank check. And they also have the ability to impose all kind of fees on garbage, parks, if they decide they want to start charging for parks, or just any kind of fees that they feel like charging, they have the authority to do based on this feasibility plan. Next slide. And when they did this plan, we kind of looking at the comparatives to other cities in Cobb County. And what we found out is that unincorporated Cobb County's millage rate is 30.35, where any of the counties that, any of the communities that have a city, their millage rate is at 36.30 by average. And this is something, and it's not really a true comparison because these cities are full cities, like the city of Marietta and Smyrna, even Powder Springs. They have their own services like fire department, police department, parks. That's why that millage rate would be, of course, at that rate. This proposed city, we don't know what it's going to be, and even a city light model, there's no history of a city light in Cobb County. So for the feasibility study to make comparisons and be able to set a millage rate from other counties wouldn't be possible. So it's just another unknown. Next slide. And as I mentioned, there are also those additional franchise fees that the proponents, stakeholders, whatever they call themselves, they did outline at the meeting on the 17th that they are going to impose franchise fees because cities do have a right to do that. They'll impose a fee on the electric company, the gas company, and your landline providers. And those new fees that these companies will be burdened with will be put on the residents. So this is additional fees that they are planning because they need that revenue. So this is another fee and another reason to vote no. Next slide. Any questions?
Yep, somebody has a question. Would residents pay taxes directly to Mableton City or to Cobb County, and then the county would distribute the money to Mableton government? Do you know the answer to that?
Yes. Oh, go ahead. Yes, the current plan is for us to pay the county, and I don't know how it will look, of course, on your bill, and then the county will forward those funds as a pass-through. There are a couple of things about getting double charged, depending on, again, whether or not the city decides to impose taxes that is not yet concluded in terms of, or not yet understood in terms of how the county is going to work within that to make sure that there's not any double dipping and we don't get charged twice. So again, these are things that the county was not able to really vet and understand and communicate because, as they said, they weren't able to look at this feasibility study and understand all of these pieces and how it could be, you know, sort of moved forward in order to ensure that there was a really solid understanding of what that's going to look like. Because again, if they decide to charge us, you know, a county tax on top of the city taxes, then will it be that they increase the taxes and then they pass through what they have committed to, and then they'll keep the portion that they need because of their loss of revenue from property taxes? Unclear. So I think these are all a part of these unknowns that, you know, no one was able to do because, one, this moved through the legislature so quickly, and two, because we haven't gotten a consistent answer from the proponents of this. Thank you for the question.
That's all we have right now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so now we've talked about taxes, and the question was asked about city versus county services. And let's take a little deeper dive into this whole concept of city light, because it really, at the heart of light, has to do with the number of services. Now, in order to be a city and to propose a city, you have to have at least 3 services that you're offering. The current proposal from Mableton is 4 services. We talked about them earlier: planning and zoning, code enforcement, with a limited municipal court that will deal with any violations, parks and rec, and sanitation. Now, the services that will continue to be offered by Cobb County, and again, so that means there's some handshaking going on, and we're not quite sure how that's going to work because the county hasn't been able to really develop a plan there. And they don't have a plan really to map against. The feasibility study, as we mentioned, is not a plan, is not a budget. So a couple of things: of course, police and fire and 911, very important. They will continue to be provided by the county, so we don't have to worry about where fire stations are, et cetera. Cobb County Court, Cobb County Jail, still going to be Cobb County controlled, except for that limited municipal court we'll have for code specifically. Traffic and roads is under Cobb County. There were some conflicting messages that were given earlier. The feasibility study is not based on traffic and roads. And I mean, the city has the option, again, this whole concept of home rule, which is, again, part of the Georgia statute, says that, to be honest, if they decide they want to take something on, they could do that later. But as of now, what they are proposing does not include, in the feasibility study that supposedly justifies it, is not traffic and roads. Water, sewer, and stormwater, still Cobb County. Business licensing, still Cobb County. We're going to talk about that later as it relates to how, you know, taking on zoning and planning and code enforcement alone is not enough for what, you know, the proponents say they want to do in terms of revitalizing the South Cobb area. The school system, that's something that also has come up. That is not, no city can take on a new school. That is actually part of the Georgia law, is that we can't just start a city and say, oh, we're going to have a new school system. So that stays under Cobb County. The library system, animal services, the bus services, which are also a huge part of when you look at Cumberland and the development they had there, transportation was a big part of that, and then senior services. So hopefully this gives you a good sense of what's being provided by Cobb County and what is from the start, what they proposed to be included. And that so anything else would be outside of the feasibility study, and we would have no idea if we actually had the revenue to support it. So what they have proposed and what the feasibility study says is feasible only includes the 4 services you see there with the limits in municipal court. So to return to the question, is the claim of better services realistic? The proponents of cityhood suggest that planning and zoning and code enforcement and having local control with a city over those things will enable the desired economic development of South Cobb. We regretfully disagree. We suggest that this can and is actually already happening without the costs and risks of cityhood. So cityhood, Deidre said it many times, we're going to keep saying it, there are way too many unknowns. And we can actually do a lot of the things that will resolve some of these questions, these sort of concerns without cityhood. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment.
And to Tanya's point, the planning and zoning is one of the areas that the proponents will be taking over, and they are doing it because the idea is that they'll be able to have more control. And that's their claim, you know, that they'll be able to utilize the tax dollars here. But the reality is that we already have local control. Zoning decisions, you know, aren't really forced on Cobb County, and with all the county commissioner has zoning meetings every month. They're open to the community. They're live streamed. They're taped. So every citizen has a right to see them and be there and participate in them. And since 2001, the county commissioner, Mableton Improvement Coalition, and they voted in tandem with in zoning and any planning, and when things come up, they actually vote. They are voting locally, so they're already that's already taken place. Then there are organizations throughout the Mapleton and South Cobb area that really are working on redevelopment and working hand in hand with that. So some of the claims that Mapleton had, you know, too many tire stores and dollar stores. And what we found is that most recently, they voted and denied an auto zone for the area. So the commissioner and the local leaders are really already have control over the planning and the zoning, and they're working in tandem to make sure that they're improving the community. Next slide.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
The little footnote on Magnolia Crossing, which is a residential development that was torn down. And part of it being torn down was because of certain code issues, which again, we'll talk about shortly, have been improved since then. But Magnolia Crossing is a perfect example that just recently, actually just in the last couple of months, they sent the developers back to revise the site plan. Magnolia Crossing, for your information, is in the Six Flags area. And the idea is that they were not satisfied with the amount of commercial sort of balance with they wanted a grocery store, so there were a lot of things that they pushed back on, they being the county commission and Monique Sheffield, who is the District 4 leadership. They sent the developers back to revise the site plan and basically refused it. And I think that's significant, because it all goes towards this whole concept of, you know, being strong and being concerned about what it means to the strategy for really enhancing this area.
And with that, I think we kind of in agreement with that. As I mentioned, that they are working on improving the community. The commissioner is the claim, and it was even shown on the news yesterday that there's too many dollar stores or tire stores or broken down buildings. But then when you drive and see throughout the community, there is a lot of development going on, and so the reality is that having the licensing, business license are done on the county level. They're not done through this new city. So if a business wants to open in a community, they just go to Cobb County and get a business license. And if an area is zoned for a daycare, they're allowed to open that. If it's zoned for a dollar store, they're allowed to. So it's really not a zoning. It's really on the level of a business license, and that's done through the county. And the idea of them wanting more sit-down restaurants, that can happen, and that is actually happening. And at the last forum that we had with Mableton Improvement Coalition, and Tanya's going to speak to that in a bit, that they're working on a lot of economic development in bringing businesses that are going to add to the quality of life. So this is already taking place, and we really don't need a city for this, because the zoning and planning is already in place, and they're listening to the citizens and doing that. Next slide. And as they're listening, we just have a most recent example in September. The commissioner and the county board had actually passed an amendment that was going to address a lot of the concerns that the citizens in Mapleton had, particularly as it related to slumlords and some rundown buildings and code enforcement, and them not having enough code enforcement to really come out and inspect buildings. What the commissioner and the county did was they created an amendment that put the onus on the landlords that had any multifamily rentals, that they have to have the building inspected, and they have to pass that inspection before they're able to renew their license. So one, that addresses that problem, but it also puts the onus on the landlords as opposed to the stress of the code enforcement. They've also implemented legislation on the broken signage and roadways. So they're addressing and listening to the community and passing this code enforcement that's going to help give the overall improvement to the area. And then, as I mentioned, they taking some of that burden off the code enforcement. But what they have done is they passed in the budget to hire 4 new additional code enforcement officers. So with that said, the leadership is listening to the community, and they're making the changes and making the adjustments. So we really actually don't need a new layer of government to do what the county is already doing. Next slide.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to add again.
That's okay. We have a lot to say here.
Yeah, there is a lot to say. I just have to say, so it is interesting because I actually just thought about it, Deidre, as you were talking, because one of the points that came out in the forum, the MIC forum that was hosted with both sides there, was that the somehow the proponents have come up with a number that they think is appropriate for code enforcement officers. Now, that number, I'm not sure what it's based on, but as Deidre said, there are recent, as of September 2022, so just last month, amendments that actually change what's needed in the code enforcement office. So presumably that would reduce, as she said, the burden on code enforcement. So is that number still valid, especially if it was part of the whole activity in 2020 around the feasibility study? So again, just not with an outdated study, not understanding with the things that are happening today, it doesn't make sense to make this big of a move and use that as the defense.
Any questions?
Yeah, we have a question. Are there any proposed leaders for the city, and who is going to run the initial city if it passes? We also have another very relatable question is who is behind this whole thing?
Ooh, I'd love to answer that.
You take it, Deirdre. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but yeah, take it.
All right. Well, this is another unknown, but it's kind of interesting because the to the first question about who's going to run the city, no one's coming forth and saying they want a position, but the proponents that are that were commissioned the study that were South Cobb Alliance. Then after their presentation on the 17th, they rebranded themselves and came out with a new name and called themselves Mableton Yes. And now they've been, they have a website. There are several people on it. So you can go to their website and see the proponents of this. It's Erica Thomas, Trey Hutchison, Golf Porter, and a few other people. I can't remember their names offhand, but just so you know, the people are questionable. And one no longer lives in Cobb County, but is a proponent for this, lives in DeKalb County. And the other is stepping down in a state leadership and on record has had some ethics violations. So these are the people that have been behind it. And I'm assuming that they will probably be moving forward if this is passed to be the new leaders. But the problem is they don't show up for their events. They don't answer questions. You can go to their website, but you can't ask questions. So there's so many unknowns and they're not speaking on what the leadership is going to be. They're just the stakeholders, as they call themselves as well. So it's just, it's very questionable. So.
Yeah, and ditto.
We do have one more question. Somebody said, I recall hearing in a town hall a couple months ago where the Pro City group presented the financial feasibility study that the county parks and rec department would still need to help the new city with management of parks because the county has so many more resources. Doesn't the county have benefit of economies of scale to better serve the area?
So read the question one more time. Is it about the whether that will happen or?
Well, okay, I'll read it to you one more time. I recall hearing in a town hall a couple months ago where the Pro City group presented the financial feasibility study that the county parks and rec department would still need to help the new city with management of parks because the county has so many more resources. Doesn't the county have benefit of economies of scale to better serve the area? So
okay, I'll just answer it as best I can. If you have a follow-up question, please put it in. So in the feasibility study, it is included actually maintenance estimates for each of the parks in the impacted area. So maintenance is on the city. From the perspective of ownership, the cities have the option to buy the parks, but again, that would be extra money that is not in the feasibility study. So the parks belong to the county. So when you talk about economies of scale, clearly that is one of the drawbacks of a city, is that depending upon what types of things you're doing, you are not going to have the economies of scale of the county. And so the prices will go up for certain things. So again, this is one of those unknowns where the county and the city will need to work together, because ultimately the county owns the park until the city chooses to buy it, but the city is responsible for maintaining it, doing the upkeep. So it is one of those things where we're not going to get the economies of scale for everything, but we may get some for some, to be determined. And as Deirdre mentioned before, if the city decided to buy a park or just up the fees of the park, so maybe you go to a park for free now, but then they add a $3 parking fee, that would be up to the city within that transition time out of the county over the 2 years after the election. So yeah. That is another unknown, but those are the sort of parameters around it. And the feasibility study does have money allocated to maintenance. But again, that would be on us, and we would not be getting the economies of scale of the county. I hope that answered the question. It was a lot.
Yes, I think so. All right, we will go back to your presenting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So is control over zoning and code enforcement enough? So we've got this city light with a couple of, and actually it's interesting because we've been talking about zoning and code enforcement, and planning is actually much more important, right? Zoning and code enforcement are part of the execution of a plan. As a consultant, that's kind of my my sort of order of things. And part of our biggest issue is that there is no plan. And this, Trey Hutchins in July of 2022 spoke to maybe you could call it a plan for the Six Flags Entertainment District. So, right, people come here, they want to stay here. That's a great slogan, but what does it need to have in order to happen? That's the plan. What zoning needs to occur in various areas around Six Flags in order to make it an entertainment district? What's the plan? What will it require? And it's not simply a matter of better zoning and code enforcement. Certain types of zoning and the appropriate code enforcement. So and then how does the rest of the impacted area figure in? Again, we are talking about a city that will be incorporated under the name Mableton, but it includes a much broader area. So how do those folks, how are they going to benefit? Show us the vision. I was actually open to being convinced when I first heard about it, but nothing I hear is specific, and everything I hear is kind of all over the place. An example is the battery development around Truist Park was not accomplished with zoning and code enforcement alone. There was planning, but there was also a taxpayer bond, an ongoing $15 million annual cost associated with that. And there was support from the Cumberland Community Improvement District, which I'm going to talk about as another option that is much less costly and has a very different mechanism than cityhood, but could actually reach the same benefits that everyone seems to be looking for. So on this sort of economic development, right, kind of creating this booming South Cobb, the claim from the cityhood proponents is that it will allow us to develop community improvement districts. Well, the reality is community improvement districts do not require a city. Cumberland is not a city. They were one of the first community improvement districts in the Atlanta metropolitan area. And I think in Georgia, I don't remember that specifically. But MIC, the Mableton Improvement Coalition, and the District 4 Commissioner have been working on a Mableton CID since 2018. Now, two things about that. One is that what will help is that the updated this year Cobb County 2040 plan includes support for developing CIDs locally. So that means here in South Cobb, and it is in the intent that they're really helping to develop the area. And the second is, let's look to our local organizations, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, Mick and our District 4 Commissioner, because the work that they're doing on that is easy sort of ways to translate whatever plans they have into this vision of really a wonderfully developed area. The bonus too is, unlike a city, a community improvement district is created for a finite period of time, 6 years. And at the end of that period, property owners, we can vote whether or not we want it to continue for another 6 years. A city, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to push it through the legislature, and we're stuck until that gets passed or gets done. And again, maybe that'll be the appropriate answer in the future. Right now, with all of these unknowns and all these other options, it's not a good choice. Another thing in favor of kind of holding off, or just not doing cityhood altogether, we have a new, more South Cobb friendly, in all honesty, county administration in place. 2 of the members of the county commission are from residents of District 4. The chairwoman, Lisa Cupid, and the District 4 representative, of course, Monique Sheffield, as required. And in 2020, this sort of more South Cobb friendly county administration appointed a new county manager. So things are really, really changing at the county level that are South Cobb friendly. And Monique Sheffield, the District 4 Cobb County Commissioner, was quoted in the Marietta Daily Journal as saying that it's just getting our developer partners and our business partners to say, hey, this is a gem down here. They're a diamond in the rough. And she's committed to doing that and says, again, at the end of 2021, not more than a year ago, that it's a process that is moving along well to rebrand South Cobb as a premier part of the metro Atlanta area. Let's not stop that progress and inject cityhood into it. And things are already happening. As she said, the process is happening. Local organizations are already doing the hard work. So we not only have people at the county that are looking out for South Cobb and Mableton, the city, that it is today, the historic district, I'll call it, so we can differentiate.
It's not a city.
It's not a city, correct. The Mableton Improvement Coalition has been wonderful. This year alone, they've had the inaugural Taste of Mableton, the inaugural Economic Development Summit. So there's already, the machine is in place for us to create the plan, which doesn't exist now, to actually move forward. Let's just keep on with that momentum, keeping the taxes low and not building this other layer. Then you've got the Austell Community Task Force, because as Deirdre mentioned, other parts are included in this map for this city. Austell Community Task Force has been working hard on things. Powder Springs Community Task Force has been working hard. So everyone is dedicated to really building up the economics and the attractiveness of South Cobb, which will benefit all of us. There is also something called the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority. I didn't know about the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority. Did you know? They hold monthly meetings, they're open to the public, and they are really, they were established to revitalize and redevelop South Cobb. Sound familiar? That's been the rallying cry of the cityhood folks forever. They have the authority to issue bonds and assist in financing infrastructure improvements for this economic development that we'll be talking about. And they own 50 acres of land near I-20 and Six Flags. So they're responsible for the redevelopment of that. What happens if a city is put in place? Unclear. They introduced a new economic development coordinator in their August meeting. I'm sure she's available for contact if you have ideas, if you have. So it is really, really important to understand what is already in place to support all of the things that they say cityhood is needed for. We disagree. The last thing I'll mention on this is that there is an actual strategy that was developed to support South Cobb development. And according to the Cobb County website, it was intended to help implement the necessary projects to improve South Cobb. The South Cobb Redevelopment Authority, the organization I just spoke about, is who's responsible for spearheading that implementation, that strategy. So again, their primary basis is preserving and enhancing the existing assets and transforming liabilities into strengths. And to me, if all of these things are in place, why are we not leveraging those as opposed to creating something that we have no idea how it's going to function? We have no idea what it's going to cost. And it can easily blow up out of control, as they saw in 1916 when they had to disincorporate because of the costs. It's time to break for questions.
Questions right now?
Okay, well, we'll keep rolling.
Rolling.
We're doing good on timing. So this is, and as Tanya was mentioning, it just speaks to why, why do we need a city? Why do we need another extra layer of government? We're encouraging and informing you to reasons to vote no. And our own state representative, David Wilkerson, stated at our last forum and publicly that he doesn't even think this is a good idea. He said, I don't think it's good for the county, and I don't think it's good for the residents. So if our own state representative is not for it. And that was recent, stated in the Marietta Daily Journal. And also, you know, the concerns are there are too many unknowns. We don't even know who's behind it. We don't know what their plan is. You know, we don't see, you know, they don't have a plan. They've got a vision, but no plan, and no plan to implement it. They've consistently demonstrated a lack of transparency, which is why a lot of people did not know about this until it was already passing through the legislation. The lack of leadership. They've stated that they would host town halls and information sessions. Then they did not show up. I went to 2 at the library because I'm open. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to understand what the plan is. And you come with no plan or you don't come. That was like, and there was a forum that Austell Community Task Force and Mapleton Improvement Coalition invited both sides so they could share with the community the pros and the cons. This was on the 11th. The pro people didn't show up. They declined. And then they had one representative come and just reference the feasibility study. No answers. So there's conflicting messages in the answers, and then the lack of communication that's really impacting everyone. They consistently will not say all the communities that are affected. So these unknowns and just, you know, disinformation is just a good reason to vote no. And next slide.
So the question is, do you want an additional unplanned, so there's no plan, unproven, potentially costly layer of government that will very likely increase taxes and fees and all kinds of things? And again, we don't know this, but that's part of the problem. We're not sure. And it could be costly. You've seen some data that says that it could very likely go up. Then vote no. And choose working with the local and the county organizations that are dedicated to what we say the objective is, right? Is to make it a better South Cobb, to improve South Cobb, because they've already begun the work. And it keeps the status quo, especially as far as taxes. And that's what we want. We definitely would like more improvement with the existing taxes. We have existing infrastructure we're already paying for that we're not utilizing. And with that, we encourage you to vote no on the cityhood question that appears on your ballot as House Bill number 839 to determine whether to incorporate as the city of Mableton. So vote no, share it on social media, because again, a lot of people are still not aware. Contact your local elected officials, ask them to speak out. Phone, email, text, whatever is their best mechanism. Family, friends, and neighbors in the impacted area. If you don't know, tell them to go to the map. If you suspect, if you are in unincorporated Powder Springs, Austell, Marietta, Smyrna, check.
Because you
Well,
may
or
well
you'll
be
see it on your ballot. And if you see it on your ballot and you didn't know, you should definitely vote no. And our last push is to donate. With the donations we've gotten, we've already sent 15,000 postcards to high propensity voters. This area includes 80,000 people. With that many people impacted, we want to send more, and we need to send more because we want to make sure that everyone is aware and votes informed. And with that, we'll get into a final Q&A for the last couple minutes.
We do not have any more questions at this time. We did have somebody had asked, I think they may not have joined us a little late, but oh wait, got a question. Any idea why they decided to grab areas not in Mableton? I'm in Austell and I don't want to be a Mableton resident.
So Can I, well, I'm gonna, I saw the other question too about who's supposed to be in charge, which we did talk about. And that, I mean, that is a huge issue. Again, I'm going to just talk from my experience in terms of the work that I do. If you are trying to convince someone to make a change, you tell them, you tell them why that change is important, and you stand out front. The leadership, and again, I put that in quotes, I don't know who the leadership of the proponents, we've been referring to them as proponents, as advocates. It's from day to day, it changes. And that is, I wouldn't want that with a city. And so if there are people who are going to be wanting or want to be in that position, why wouldn't you step forward? I mean, and you know, when we did the Mick debate, it was all about how we're all neighbors. We all want the best. And to the question about any idea why they decided to grab areas not in Mableton, I think it's interesting. I talked to Deirdre about this. I said, if they had named this city South Cobb, they probably would have done a better job of convincing people, because what people see is, but I don't live in Mabel. They don't associate with that name. So again, my consulting brain says, did they think about how this would hit people that, you know, don't sort of identify as Mableton, and you've brought those people in. Now, to the specific question of how they decided to grab it, similarly, we talked to as many people as we could. It is not clear. At first, they talked about how it was based on census sort of
That was a
areas.
lie.
And
Sorry.
I'm not going to go that far, but I'm going to say what we look at in the map is it's not aligned. The fact is it doesn't align that way. So that doesn't, it's not substantiated by what the map actually reflects. So, you know, and then we heard something else about, but we did know that it's pretty clear. Again, everything is murky, that when they first proposed it as just that 40,000 that we talked about was in Mableton, that wasn't sufficient to make it feasible. That's what we've heard. So they pulled in some of these other areas to kind of up the actual revenues that will be coming into the city to support the expenses of this city. So again, do we know? No. Should we know? Yes.
Should have known.
And that data is not out there. And Deirdre talks about this all the time. I mean, we've been really pushing the message, and we've been pulling them behind us. They should be leading the charge on this. We should be at their meetings kind of bringing up points, but we're bringing up points and then they kind of echo. That's not how it should be. If for what we're talking about, this additional layer, that is, I mean, it's a government layer. Why is there not someone standing up and saying, yeah, and I'm hoping that I can be mayor. I'm hoping that I can be on the city council. If you don't have that, there's some big concern.
They're hiding, and this would be the largest city in Cobb County.
By a lot.
The largest city. And you know, for people that have lived here for many years, and a lot of volunteers, I think every single one of you that have come together and supported this in spreading the message. But as I speak and listen to people that have been in the community for a long time, they don't want it. They don't want it. They're like, I've lived here. I see the changes. I just don't like green space going away. But the plan, and there've been, you know, they've added some dog parks. They've added, you know, there've been the plans are there, and you even see it. You know how great the Silver Comet Trail is now. I mean, it is a fine community, and an extra layer of government, of unknown people that won't even pen their name or present at a forum that they even plan. It makes it very questionable. I wish they would put together a presentation like we have to let us know. Why we go. I want to know. Maybe you got a good plan, but even some of the people that were on the town hall last week that were pro said, I don't see a plan. And I'm like, that's your side. You know, like they should have one.
Deirdre, we have another question. Do you know if the city of Smyrna has shown interest in unincorporating I'm sorry. Do you know if City of Smyrna have shown interest in incorporating unincorporated Smyrna into Smyrna proper? To my understanding, 30082 is unincorporated Smyrna.
Yes.
Would you
There
like to
have,
address that?
yeah. So a couple things. One, there was some talk about 30082 being sort of annexed. When Smyrna did their study, they determined that that would be costly. One of the things that needs to be factored in is the time it would take from the fire stations that exist for fire to reach us, for all of the
And
services that they
police.
provide. So, would they have to build another fire station? All of those things, right? That you got to
Yeah.
figure out when you leave the county. I mean, I watched the county town hall and they were talking about, for instance, East Cobb, right? That they had only a certain number of fire stations in their location, and that some of the fire stations were kind of located outside the border of what the city would be. So all of these things are, so Smyrna did not choose to because it was not feasible. This same question is actually a great question for what's going to happen between this sort of handshake that needs to occur between what would be a city of Mableton and the county. And none of that is defined. And we could run into the same problems in terms of, somebody asked about the parks and recreation. Obviously zoning and code enforcement is a different thing, but when you talk about parks and recreation and sanitation, there's some question as to what that level of service would look like and how different it would be from the county, and it may not necessarily be better.
Thank you for that question.
All right, well,
I do want to say that, I really appreciate the questions and everyone's coming and listening to this information session. And, we are able to provide you with this information, but as we mentioned at the beginning, we're residents, we're your neighbors. We're not politicians. This is not our full-time jobs. We haven't spent since 2020 studying this. We just found out about it in April. So the proponents, the stakeholders, or whomever, really have a responsibility to meet with the public and provide this kind of information. And it really is shame on them. And that's the reason to vote no.
and I do want to give a special thanks to, if you watch the first town hall that we had on, gosh, it seems like forever ago, October 8th. We Christy Lynn presented, and a lot of the research was done by Christy Lynn, and so we want to just thank her for a lot of the slides that were put together around these key issues, and thanks to all of you that donated and have made it possible for us to get the word out, because really that's kind of our major, we just want people to vote informed, and we hope that the information that we've given you persuades you to vote no, but at the very least you need to know about it. All right, I want to be respectful of people's time.
Yep,
thanks for joining, and thanks for watching if you watched it after the fact.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.